Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Charging Station. I'm here with Pastor John. It is great to be with you today.
It's an honor to be on this episode with you. We're kind of tying into Defy the Odds, and great times we've been having already. The testimonies that are coming in our life groups, and they've been great.
You know, I heard about the one we aired, I believe, last week when we had Scott, and I believe it was Scott. He was with us.
Yes.
And what a wonderful time. People loved it. So I just encourage you that you dive into this. And if you hadn't went back and viewed or listened to the other charging stations in the past, you need to go back and check them out. They're on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook.
Yeah, I'm smiling because we're disappointing people right now because they see the two of us and they know it's not going to be a This Is Us segment, but that's coming up soon.
It is.
But tonight we want to take a little bit of a different turn.
Yeah. We want to go back and look at this past Sundays, which would have been, what day was Sunday? Help me out with that. Yeah, anyways, it's past Sundays.
Yeah.
Check it out on the app, on YouTube. Go back and watch the full sermon. But it was our Start Over Sunday. And let me tell you, Pastor, I thoroughly enjoyed seeing faces that we hadn't seen in a while. Disappointed that some weren't here. But I think that's just going to be the norm of things when we I want to say expect a hope.
Yeah.
That people will come back into the house. But it was a wonderful time. Wonderful message, wonderful worship. And I know I was glad to be part. And I think we're going to kind of do our old school recap on this, if you want to call it old school.
Yeah, we can. Let's go ahead and get started because part of it, even the vision behind the Start Over Service Sunday is not just people that haven't been to the house of the Lord in a while.
Exactly.
But just in our own lives, period. Yeah. There are those times where we need to hit the restart button. And God gives us those opportunities. He gives us those opportunities to say, okay, let's put things where they need to be. Last Friday night, I was privileged to speak in Statenville, Georgia, near Valdosta. And one of the things that came to my mind was the idea of the refresh button. There are times in our lives where we need to be refreshed. For whatever reason, things get out of whack. Things get misplaced. They don't seem to be working and coming through. And on the computer, there is literally a button that you hit. And when you hit that, it restarts and refreshes everything.
Absolutely.
And there's those seasons in our lives where we need that. Maybe you're listening to this episode and you're in the same place and you need to hit the reset button and restart some things. Absolutely. That is the heart behind the Start Over Sunday.
It can be frustrating to hear somebody tell you sometimes too, hey, hit the refresh button. I know if you're trying to get online and you're trying to get this thing, just refresh the page. But we got to do it sometimes.
We do.
And just as the internet give you glitches, sometimes our life throws us hardships. Sometimes it's all caused by ourselves, whatever else. But so you were in Luke 15.
Yeah.
Luke 15 is a very rich passage of scripture. You said it was confusing Sunday.
It has been. I've had a difficult time figuring it out.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the stories, and we got to be careful when we deal with parables that Jesus gave. I think that when we study the parables, that there is generally a one thought, common theme that Jesus is trying to convey to his people. Now, we can always pull different things out of it. Sometimes that's detrimental to us because we begin to read too much into the passage that's not there. That is why I say you can't build theology on it. And so it's very dangerous to do that.
Because parables are written usually or he's spoken to, we say, written in the Bible, but he spoke them to a certain group of people that was going through a certain situation and needed to hear that teaching.
Yeah, and some of them, they didn't get it. Jesus knew they weren't going to get it, but that's the way that he chose to speak to them because it was a way to relate to life. Yeah. And that is exactly what he does in this because there's 3 certain stories that he gives, but again, I think they relate to one truth.
So real quick, let's give our listeners a recap of those 3 stories. What were they? Let's go.
Okay, now y'all made fun of my sheepdog, the little icons that we had up there, but the first one is the lost sheep. This is where you have a shepherd, and he has 100 sheep, which, by the way, is more than what a shepherd would normally have within that time. The majority of the time, shepherds would only be responsible for 40 sheep, and then if they got beyond 40, they would have sub-shepherds that would come in to assist them. So here he is. He's got 100 sheep. He leaves because one of them wanders away. He leaves the 99 alone or with somebody else, whatever he does with that, the scripture doesn't say. And he goes and looks for the sheep that was lost. And so he finds it, brings it back, and all of that. So
story 2.
Story 2 is the lost coin. The lost coin is where a woman has 10 coins. They were probably her bridal price, the dowry for her to get married. And we don't know if she's alone. We don't know if there's anyone else in the house. No one else is mentioned in the passage. But the idea is, the thought that we're left with is she had 10 valuable coins, but one of them went missing. And the scripture doesn't actually say, it says suppose. It doesn't say this actually happens. It says suppose a woman. And then it gives what she would do in that situation if it were to happen. If she lost the coin, she would take a light. She would get the candle. She would go into every crevice and every corner. She'd begin to sweep the place that she was in to find the coin. And when in this situation, if she finds it, she would rejoice and say, come on, let's come over and let's celebrate what I found.
Absolutely. All right. So 3.
And then there's the lost son, which, I've spoken before about this. I don't really think that's a good title for it, but it is in this case exactly what was going on. Someone who was near to the father disrespected his father by asking for his inheritance early, was really a slap in the face to his dad. And then he went to a faraway country. And while he was there, he gave his life, lived a life of rebellion, found themselves in the pits of despair, dreamed of being in his father's house. So he comes back, and I can imagine him as he is thinking in his mind about what he's going to tell the dad. I'm not coming back as a son. I know I've blown that, but I just want to come back as a servant. And before he even gets to say anything, his dad stops and says, no, let's celebrate your return.
Yeah. Wow. So these 3 stories, they have a lot in common, but they have a lot different because one's about a sheep, one's about a coin, one's about a person.
Yep.
And if we're not careful, we'll jump straight to the fact that, okay, it's about me wandering away from God and coming straight back. And yes, ultimately they can be for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But what are they not about? Let's do that. So you mentioned a few things that what they're not about, what actually.
Yeah, I don't see there are a lot of excuses as to who's responsible for the object. I'm going to say object because it's a better way of not to personify a person as an object, but it is, and it's okay to use in this setting. But the idea is that there's no one that the scripture says is responsible as for the reason that they wandered away or were lost. Sometimes I believe that we look for excuses and try to point blame on certain people for certain things that have gone on. And I don't see that in this passage.
Okay, so I'm trying not to say too much.
I know.
So what I see here, okay, let's go. Let's the sheep. So the shepherd didn't do something to push him away.
Well,
could he have?
We don't know. But if he was a good shepherd, that's why I say I don't know that all of these relate to God. But the fact is, if he was really a good shepherd, then why did the sheep wander off in the first place?
Why wouldn't he keep an eye on it?
Exactly. Same thing with the coin. The woman lost it. It was valuable to her, but if it was really that valuable, what happened? And I understand things happen in life. I get it. But the point of the story is not to say that someone is responsible for all of this, because that's not the point that Jesus is making. That's not what the subject is about.
Yeah. So it's not about what happened, who caused it to be lost. It's not about the object itself that was lost. So what was it about?
It's the common thread that is in all 3 of these is the fact of returning. These 3 all come down to the importance of returning. Now, Jesus, in the context of it, he's talking to specific people, tax collectors and notorious sinners, those who have been known to be away from God because of their sin. They're separated from God. Pastor Bobby, all of us are in that place. I don't care who we are, how holy we think we are born into sin. Sin separates us. And so the reality is all of us are away from God, and we need to return. And then he even says, not only is there tax collectors and notorious sinners, but then also you have the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law. They're the same ones. And so it's easy to point a finger and say to some that, you're away from God, but they themselves, the religious ones, were away from God and needed to come home.
I heard, I sat in both services. I was able to this past Sunday, had things rolling. Praise the Lord, volunteers are doing great.
Yep.
But I was able to sit there and I didn't catch that the first service. I did, but I did. You know how it is. You listen to it,
Yep.
kind of goes in. So ultimately, what we're saying, or what the Bible's saying, what you're saying as our shepherd, is that just because you're close to God today doesn't mean that we possibly can't find ourselves slipping and
No doubt. No doubt. I think in both of these camps that they were equally in a place of danger, because one knew that they were away and they were away. The other ones thought that they were close, but yet they were away. And so even within our own lives, we got to be careful. We got to be careful.
I wonder which is worse. Now you just said equal, but I wonder which is worse. This is another message for another day, Pastor. We'll let you brew on that one.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's keep rolling. So the return.
Yeah.
What does it look like?
Well, it's an act. First of all, there's an action in the return. The return requires the action of coming back to a person or a place. And that is what the Lord has been drawing us, all of us, to. And again, I'm not getting deep into this because at some point in all of our lives, every single person that is walking the face of this earth has to deal with this subject of whether or not they will return to the Father. He's provided Jesus. He's provided the Word. He's provided the Spirit to draw us. Everything is there. We have to take that step. I started the message off on Sunday by a quote that I heard from Dallas Willard that said that grace is not opposed to effort. Grace is opposed to earning. There's always that tension between we can't work for our salvation. It's a gift from God. And they're so true. There's nothing we can do to earn our salvation. But there is the effort that's involved in us receiving our salvation. We have to respond. And when it comes to returning, we have to respond.
Yeah. So what does it look like? So to return, because you have three, I'm looking at three stories. Okay. First of all, the number one, the shepherd left, he goes and finds, he went and got, what would happen? The sheep would have kept running.
They would have died. There's no question, because sheep are the one domesticated animal, so to speak, that cannot live by itself. Yeah. It has to have someone that watches over it. Yeah. And so if they would not have returned, the sheep would have died. If the coin was not found, then its value in the woman's life would have been completely lost. It was done. It was over with. And we know because he spends more time. And again, just looking at Jewish teaching, sometimes the last point that's made is the point of emphasis. So you have, even when we say the word holy, 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 holy is the one that's yelled out in that. So it's the same thought when we see the writings, because at the very end, he spends more time talking about the Son.
Yeah.
The Son was going to die spiritually and physically if he hadn't made the decision to go back. And again, Pastor Bobby, Jesus doesn't say, he doesn't say that there's a formula to follow in any of this. The first two, they went in and the shepherd and the woman went to search for what was lost. The Father never moved off the front porch. And so, God is saying, I'm calling you to return. You've got to, you got to do something. You got to do something.
And I believe sometimes God will allow us to get to a place where we know we got to come back.
Yeah.
And it's a scary spot. It's really scary, because to think that we as human beings have to sometimes go so far before we realize that we need God.
Yeah.
And if we could catch ourselves before, and I think that's where your heart's at, if I'm not wrong, even with not with just our congregation, with the world period. Where do we go? How far do we go before we say it's time to come back home? And not to Bay Harbor, to God.
No, that's the heart in all of this, because there's two truths that I found when it comes to the idea of returning. One is that separation opens us up to Satan's schemes. And it's so true. Separation opens us up to Satan's schemes. His heart, Satan's heart, when it comes to us, is for us to not receive all that God has for us. And he knows that if we are with the Father and there's reconciliation that takes place there, then there's an abundant life that's available to us. And the enemy knows that he can't experience that because he is not offered the opportunity to return. The angels weren't given the opportunity to come back. We have been given the opportunity. And so what the enemy wants to do is to steal, kill, and destroy our lives. I know we say that all the time, but that is the truth. And so when we begin to separate from in our relationships with our spouses, with with the church, with God, things get further and further away from where they need to be. Yep. And we find ourselves in a very vulnerable place.
Absolutely. You showed a video in regards to that. What was that movie? Or was it from?
It's called America the Beautiful. It's on Disney Plus, or National Geographic, but it's called Northland. That's the series. I think it's the third one in that. And it was a wolf that was coming after these muskats that were like buffaloes, and how that when they chased the wolf off, the wolf first of all was wanting the one that was the weakest. A 40-mile-per-hour sprint, 3 wolves went to capture that herd. And so they found the weakest one after they weared them out, tired them down. They found the weakest one to go after. And they, because the enemy wasn't together, because they were separated, they weren't successful. And there was a wall of those animals that were standing there, and you could just feel the breath and the power that was there when they were standing shoulder to shoulder. Yeah. It was incredible.
Yeah. And that church?
It is.
It's the church.
It is. It is. And Pastor Bobby, can I just give you an extra part of this? Later on in that episode, it's not the same story. The wolves come back a different time because they're hungry. Hungry like a wolf. They needed food, and they were going after because the taste of blood was in their mouth. And the second time in that episode, they took down one of them because they weren't together. And that is the visual that I want us to see in our own lives, because right now you're listening to this, and maybe there is some separation that's beginning to take place in the most valuable relationships that you have. And I mentioned just 3 of them, and there's more, but I mentioned marriage, I mentioned the church, and I mentioned our relationship with God. If there's anything that begins to come in to bring that separation, we find ourselves in a very dangerous place.
And a lot of times it starts with just a small frustration.
It does.
Or a small desire that doesn't line up with the desire that should be done, whether it be in your marriage, whether it be within the church, or whether it be with God.
And a great point. And I wanted to follow up with this, because if you just watched online and you were not in the house, then you missed the testimony that Jennifer and I gave. Yeah. She came up on stage, and none of this was rehearsed or any of that. But the thought was, I wanted the people to understand that just because we're the pastor and the pastor's wife, the first lady, that we're not immune to the struggles that everybody faces. And we just came out of a season in our marriage, and we've been married 27 years. It's been good. God's blessed us, but it doesn't mean that we don't have struggles. And what happened was there was just the beginning of little frustrations that began to bring a separation that we could feel. And she didn't express it. I didn't express it, but we could feel it. And so she finally texted me. I think it was a smooth move on her part, because she was able to get out how she was feeling and conveying it. I'm not saying that we don't communicate, but in that situation, it was the best way. And then I waited to respond, because I wanted to listen to what God was speaking to me, and I wanted to hear what she was saying before I responded in anger. But when the time came, God worked it all out. And what we did in that, I'm not saying we were heading towards a legal separation or anything like that. That's not nowhere near. But what we did was we stopped anything from happening.
Before anything could have happened. So I hope you're picking your phone up, texting your spouse now if you got some anger. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Maybe I'm not kidding, but sometimes we need
one time I bought a referee's flag, and I gave it to young married couples. And so the thought and I got them from the dollar store of all places, but they were referee flags. And whenever you walked into your bedroom, and if you found the flag on your bed, you knew that it was time to stop play, to have a conversation, to talk about what's going on. It's tough.
That's good.
But sometimes we need to stop and just communicate so that the separation don't happen.
And Pastor, I feel marriages right now, if we're not cautious, and I'm saying we as a body of believers, whether it be Bay Harbor Church as a whole, international, we got to be cautious, because I believe that the enemy knows if he can get the family, he can win the church, and ultimately he can win the kingdom, more or less.
And that's same thought about the wolves and the buffaloes. But here's why I believe that's the case. There is not a greater representation of our relationship with Jesus Christ than the marriage.
Yeah.
There's no place that you share more intimacy. There's no place that the greatest fruit can happen. None of that. And so when Satan comes after the marriage, because Jesus identifies us as the bride of Christ, so he attacks the physical marriages on earth because they represent the spiritual relationships that we have with God in heaven.
That's good. And see, that's another reason you need to be in the house, guys, because he mentioned that toward the end of service as well.
Yeah.
And what a man, so true, Pastor.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So true.
But we can't go there because I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, we are.
But there's another part to this. Yeah. Reconciliation opens us up to reckless rejoicing. And again, the alliteration is there, and I do that because I want to memorize it, but I also want you to memorize it. But think about all of this. It's crazy to think that a shepherd would leave 99 to go after one. That's just something that happens. It's a disappointment. Yeah, nobody wants to lose a sheep. I get that, but it's something that happens. But no. Yeah. God's saying, I'm willing to leave everything behind to pursue the one. Same thing with the coin. Yeah, we lose things on occasion. That happens. That's part of life. She was disappointed. Yeah, I get that. But it was reckless to think that she called for a celebration. And that celebration, inviting the neighbors into the house, would have cost her money. Yeah. And so that was reckless. And then the same thing with the son never even got to say what was going on before the father threw this gigantic party. But not only that, is the recklessness of the rejoicing was seen in the father literally running to go get his son that disrespected him. And so when it comes to all of these, what Jesus spent more time talking about was the rejoicing of what was gained because of the return. And so all of heaven rejoices when we return to where we need to be. All of the angels rejoice, and they can't even experience what we have. And the Father rejoices. That is the beauty of all of this. There is the joy of returning. And when we see that happening, not only is it something spiritual that takes place, it's also something that happens in our lives. When's the last time that you laughed? When's the last time that you felt joy in your life? If you're not experiencing joy and you're not laughing and you're not seeing that, maybe there's a separation and you need to return.
Pastor, that's good. That's good. Allow God to rejoice over you.
Yeah. Exactly. Give him reason.
Give him reason.
That's
good. That's good.
I thought the same thing, but it's going to count. It's going to come. And again, this was something that we dealt with in the altar. It's going to come when you allow yourself to open up to the pain that's taking place in your life. I gave an illustration. I'm not going to go deep into it, but whenever I got hurt as a child, when I'd go to my mom, the first thing my mom would say,
let me see it.
Let me see it. She recalled Sunday night that when I was a little boy, I remember what I was wearing and everything, but I walked in and I was covering my eye because my eye was hurt. I had a lot of issues with my eye. I had eye surgeries, all that, but I'd gotten pollen in my eye. I can remember everything about it. And I came in and I was covering my eye up, and she sat me up on the wash machine and she said, John, let me see it. The only way that it could be fixed was for her to see what was going on. The Father already knows, but for us, we've got to take that vulnerable step and open ourselves up to him and say, I need you to fix this.
That's good.
Return.
That's good. Hey, we love you guys. I hope you heard all this. I hope you do make that step to return. Make that step to God.
Yep.
Love you. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
God bless you.